Hello there, I'm Woolly Wormhead and welcome to my channel. In today's tutorial, I'd like to talk to you about using short rows within Mosaic Colorwork. Now, in a previous tutorial that I did on Mosaic Colorwork, when I walked you through some of the basics of it, I used an example of my shadowed hat pattern, which is free, available on knitted.com. Now, when we were looking at it, we were working within the panel in this section here. And by panel, I mean a panel of the hat, because this is worked sideways. So we looked at creating the pattern and how to slip the stitches within the panel, not worrying about any shaping. But because it's sideways, and because I do a number of sideways knit hats, and I've done a number with Mosaic Colorwork, we need to look at how we can use Mosaic Colorwork within the short rows. All right, because they need to come together to get a nice looking crown. I like a nice looking crown. Who doesn't like a nice looking crown, right? Now, that means that we need to consider where we're putting the short rows in relation to the slip stitches, because amongst the knit stitches, they're not a problem. But with the slip stitches, there's a couple of little things that we need to keep in mind. They're not difficult, but I'm just going to give you an idea of what you need to look out for and maybe some little tips to help make it a little bit easier for you. All right, so let's switch to the overhead and let's go back to that swatch that I was using before and let's see how they work and how they come together. Okay, then here we have the crown end of the chart for the shadowed hat that I used before. The bottom half of the chart is missing. I've just cut this out and focusing on the end part here so that we can see it and it's larger print. All right. Now I use the dash family in chart symbols, which means that this vertical line means a knit stitch on the right side and the horizontal one is a knit stitch on the wrong side, creating that little ridge that we know from guard stitch. The S is slip stitch regardless of whether you're on the right side or wrong side, because it's still slipping. You just got to make sure that the yarn is held at the back of the work. And this symbol here that I use in my patterns to represent a short row. If you've met me before, you know that I tend to use symbols and terminology that is quite literal. I am autistic and very neurodivergent, so these things make much more sense to me. So this infinity symbol represents the stitch that's going to be short rowed, or where we would work the short row. Now I've got tutorials on deconstructing wrap and turns and German short rows, and one for turning one into the other. And when you consider what they are as like two loops of yarn that are kind of interchanged like this is actually a perfect symbol that represents them, just in case you're wondering why I chose that symbol years and years and years ago. But anyway, so that's the stitch that's going to be short rowed. Okay, now I've just worked this row along here and I've finished this round of knit stitches in yarn A, which we have in purple, and I now have 3 knit stitches that I need to slip there from the green from yarn B below, and then a short row to put on that stitch there. Now here we have, let's take those out of the way for a minute so you can see this more clearly. There are those 4 stitches that we've got left. There are all the other stitches that have been short rowed. I've used German short rows throughout along the end here. Now, if you were working in, say, a regular garment pattern or somewhere where the short rows weren't necessarily creating a particular shape like this, you might be able to put the short row on this first stitch here, because you might think to yourself, I'm slipping it. Why do I need to slip them and then do a short row? So in some patterns you can do that. There are instances in short row colour work, and I've got patterns where you can put the short row on the stitch that's slipped and not worry about the others because they don't interfere with the shaping. However, in a sideways knit hat, that's not the case. Let's pull that chart back a minute. Here you can see that the short rows are consecutive. Every stitch that's short rowed sits next to the one that was short rowed before it, and they go along like that all the way through, which is exactly what we have on our needle here. All right. If we were to put the short row on that stitch, that will mean that we have 3 stitches slipped on that needle, which need to be dealt with at some point. Now, we know that when we work in a sideways knit hat, that the last row of the panel knits across all of the short rows and closes them all off. If you've got 3 extra stitches there, that's going to screw that up because they shouldn't be there. All right, you need to make sure, or especially on this pattern, sometimes they are every other stitch, sometimes they're every stitch. It depends on how I've shaped the pattern. You need to make sure that all the short rows are consecutive and there's no extra stitches in there unless they're intentionally meant to be there. So in this instance, putting the short row there and turning will not work because you end up with 3 rogue stitches left at the end that are going to mess up how you close off the panel. So that means that yes, you do need to slip them first before doing your short row, but it's not difficult. As with all things mosaic, well, not all things mosaic, but something I've said quite a lot before is maintaining an even tension when you are slipping the stitches. All right, and it's no different here. The particular place that you pay extra attention is as you are creating the German short row. So let's slip these purlwise to maintain orientation as we would do in the other parts of the pattern. And then we're going to put a German short row on this stitch here because it's going to be sitting next to that one. So we come over, keep our knitting nice and loose, knit that stitch, turn, then we slip it back. And as you are creating your German short row and disappearing this stitch to create the double leg stitch that's going to be in green, you need to make sure that as you're disappearing that stitch, you're not pulling this float really tight. Because look, if I pull it really do that and without paying attention, it's going to pucker up all of those stitches and we don't want that. We need to keep that at the same tension. So pinch your fabric here between your finger and thumb. Or if you've got a different knitting style, just find a way to hold the float in place with its stitches to stop it moving. So you can make that German short row nice and tight and pull it round, ready to slip those stitches back. And then as you go to knit your next stitch, just make sure that that float is of the same kind of tension, same looseness as the other one there. So let's just knit a couple of stitches and let's have a little look at that. Okay, so there's the German short row that I've put on. There's the 3 knit stitches. Okay, that's not looking too tight from the front. The German short row is as is intended. This isn't looking nice and this isn't looking puckered. It's looking nice and flat. So that's worked okay. That's really what you need to do. I know it seems awkward and maybe counterproductive to put the short row after the slip stitches, but in a sideways knit hat, there's a very good reason for doing it. In other projects, you may be able to put the short row on the first slip stitch, but you need to consider how that affects your shaping. All right, I hope that's been helpful. That's it really. Combining short rows with the Mosaic Colorwork isn't difficult. It's just considering where your slip stitches are, what the short rows are doing within the shaping. If it's a part of a garment and it's for bust shaping, you can probably do the short row in the first slip stitch immediately after the last knit stitch. It's probably not going to make a great deal of difference in that instance. But in a sideways knit hat, it does. All right, so think about where the short row is and what its function is. And then just maintain an even tension. That's it. I'm going to reiterate the point about sideways knit hats, okay, because when we come to knit across the end of the panel, we need to make sure that we have the same number of stitches on the needle that as we started at the beginning of the panel. And if you put the short row on the first slip stitch, however many stitches should have been slipped will end up on that needle and your stitch count will be off by that amount. So don't do it in a sideways knit hat. Slip the stitches, work the short row. It's not difficult. Just maintain your tension, keep an eye on it, take your time, and it will work. All right? Now, if you could be so kind as to click the like, hype and share buttons, I would much appreciate it. I'm trying to grow my channel and get some of my tips and tricks and designs out to knitters that haven't met me before or maybe need a little bit of help with their colour work and other knitting techniques. All right, I'd much appreciate it. Thank you. And until next time, happy hatting.